The question is that the aforementioned standing order be suspended for the remainder of the day's sitting. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. The aforementioned standing order is also suspended. We shall now revert to standing committees.
This working. This is working. Inconvenient, but working.
One session.
All right. This house is now in Standing Finance Committee. You want me to swap it?
Is this or that?
This isn't working. We now resume Head 87.
Head 87 resume.
Yes. All right, let's start back with the honorable member for Christchurch South until the leader comes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Permit me to join with those persons who have extended a warm and personal welcome to you, Madam Chair, back to
Thank you.
the Assembly. And of course, it would be remiss of me if I did not welcome the entire Parliament to the constituency of Christchurch South. Bordering Christchurch West. Thank you, Madam Chair. Minister, I'm particularly attracted to the portion of your presentation which speaks to the abolition or the proposed abolition of the 11 plus. I'm sure you speak to that, and you speak very confidently to it. In a country that is likely to be traumatized even by the discussion, the proposal, I'm sure you're aware of that. And one must admire the confidence with which you approach the issue. I'm sure you're aware that when this discussion as to education took place some 70 years ago, it sought to address issues of social justice. And indeed, it has, the institution of education has contributed substantially to social justice in Barbados. So that I say that to tell you what you do know, that when you do things to touch and concern adjustments to that, you will get responses that are fairly dramatic, if I may put it like that. My query, I think I've heard you say before that the system itself has suffered a certain uneven development. It has not been an ideal. It has marginalized thousands of people, young children in Barbados, into adulthood. So that while there has been large success, I think I've heard you say, and I agree with you, that there are a lot of people who have fallen by the wayside. And there's also the issue of curriculum reform. I am wondering, and I ask this on behalf of a public which has a vested interest, in proposing to abolish the 11 plus, is the major focus on the need for curriculum reform, or is it on the need to rescue those who are perceived to have been marginalized? Where is that focus? Are we looking at the curriculum? Are we looking at the inherent weakness of the curriculum? Or are we focusing on this urgent need to rescue marginalized children in Barbados? I imagine it is both, but I just wish to know where is the ministry's focus in terms of the policy.
Thank you, Member. Yes, it is both, and you are perfectly correct that you already know the answer to the question. I think we've all been at a point where we have used the phrase that we are trying to save those who have fallen through the cracks. And usually those ones who have fallen through the cracks are usually the ones that we refer to that end up, certainly you are familiar with them as well as I am in relation to the criminal justice system. But we're also talking about the ones who have gone through formal education from the youngest age right through and come out with no form of certification. We're also talking about the ones who go through the entire system of formal education and have challenges reading and writing. We're talking about the ones who have not been diagnosed along the way, who for one reason or the other, had they had the necessary diagnosis and assessment, we would perhaps have been able to have a better application of education for their particular needs. So in terms of trying to rescue a system, yes, we're trying to rescue that set, but there's another set, the ones who learn differently, who may be somewhere on the spectrum, who may be very gifted as well, who presently we don't necessarily cater for in the system, and who, because of the emphasis on an examination, and I must tell you that I've seen the pressures from both parents and students having to prepare for the examination, for the 11 plus examination. And sometimes you see the parents under more pressure than the students. But the fact of the matter is there is tremendous pressure being brought to bear to pass for a particular school or another school, as opposed to allowing children to develop at their natural pace and to provide the various specialized institutions for persons who may be faster learners and those who may not be so fast in the system. So it's really an attempt to address a number of the deficiencies that I think we have seen creeping into the system over the years and the imbalances that exist. I think it is also a case of looking at how resources have been applied, because I think there has also been a focus on certain schools over others getting access to resources, and therefore you have certain school plans that are in a better condition than others. Therefore, in terms of the imbalance, in terms of societal imbalances, has often been obviously a cadre of persons who may have more in terms of disposable income, being able to invest back into plant structures as well, depending on where the students are from. So you have seen over the years what has emerged on the tips of everyone's tongue is the schools who are more privileged, and it's the students who go to the more privileged schools and those who have not been performing at the rate that would keep up with the others. As a consequence, curriculum reform has to address those injustices, but it also has a responsibility to shape the minds of Barbadians in a way that we perhaps did not have the opportunity before to do. I think we've come a long way in terms of curriculum reform. But when I think of the type of Barbadian that I would like to see in the next 10, 15, and 20 years, certainly it is a Barbadian that is grounded in an understanding of Africa, of the input which we've had into Panama. It's a Barbadian who understands the connections with the Carolinas. It's a Barbadian who understands all of the achievements of Barbadians, homegrown, and their impact all across the global landscape. So our curriculum can no longer be something that we collide with after school. It has to be something which is ingrained in us as we are going through formal education. And the next phase in terms of the reforms is to be able to look at the historical side, to be able to ground persons in an understanding of their purpose and their value in life, with being young adults, certainly in this landscape of Barbados as well. So I hope that has answered your question in terms of the approach that has to be taken, because all of the studies have spoken to the same imbalances, but we have not been able as a society to address the imbalances. And I can bring you report after report that has said the exact same thing. All the white papers on education, the green papers, every single report all across the length and breadth of Barbados has basically said we need to get rid of the 11+ examination. We need to have a better system in place for the transition from primary to secondary school. We are not saying as an administration anything else than I believe in the gut of most Barbadians they already know. What we are asking the population to do is to join with us to accept that what we have has not been working for a vast percentage of the population, and to find ways to tweak it and to fine-tune it to make it more relevant for persons to be able to leave school with qualifications, or even to be able to set up their own businesses and to be able to compete on the global stage as well.
Thank you very much, Minister. And in answer to your question, yes, you have answered the question as to the need. My next question relates to the timing. And we all know that our modern democracy is founded largely on two institutions. Two institutions have contributed more than any other to the building of this democracy. And I speak of the trade union movement, and I speak of the institution of education. I cannot think of two other institutions that have contributed more to the success of the building of what we call our modern democracy. And staying with the theme of a nation that is likely to convulse at the disclosure that within some short time, an institution that Barbadians have invested heavily, not only financially, but emotionally, the 11+. There has been such heavy investment made into that I would like to encourage the government to thread very carefully in terms of its approach. And you did answer the question in relation to the approach. It's the timing that this country deserves to know something about. I don't teach, I'm only a parent, and I know that there are parents and there certainly are teachers, I think, who are presently preparing their third formers, if not second formers, for an exam next year, 2021. And Minister, they deserve to know when the government proposes to implement the abolition. Will it be incremental? Is it going to come in one fell swoop? Or you made the disclosure. And having made the disclosure, I think the country is now entitled to hear when the new scheme will come into being. I'm obliged to you.
Thank you, Member. Let me just say that in making the disclosure, it really wasn't so much of a disclosure since the Prime Minister has been saying this from the time we came to office. We've been saying this as a government. What she indicated is that on my return, that I would start the conversation with the country about the unfolding of the new reforms. And that's what I indicated, that we've already established the committee within the Ministry of Education, the advisory committee. We have also started the conversation with the various stakeholders, the principals. We have started to engage them about the transition and looking at the types of schools that they have, the types of issues that they're having and the challenges, looking at the type of curriculum that we will have to tailor and to tweak because of what we are seeing within the educational system as well. We are mindful that one of the biggest challenges is that we have been teaching for a test, and the rest of the world has stopped teaching to a test, and we are going to be left behind if we continue on the current trajectory. Because it is now, all of the learning is showing that we must equip young people to discover, to explore, to question, to inquire. The days of reading a comprehension and then just simply pulling out the answers out of the question, out of the narrative, and then 5 minutes later not being able to say what it is that you have learned must come to an end. Because I don't know how many of you engage with young people, but oftentimes because we are testing them and assessing them according to an examination, they are only learning for the examination and nothing more. So I am not, I've been through a lot in the last year, so my back has broadened significantly. So I am not afraid of difficult decisions or difficult questions or difficult approaches, because in everything there must be change, and we must be able to transition when we realize that things are not necessarily working for us. So I am not too concerned. I think we will weigh all of the opinions when that opportunity arises. We will listen to the public, as we have done as an opposition and certainly as a government. But I am not afraid of the difficult decisions, because the learning is very clear in terms of what we have been doing to several Barbadians, whether it is the ones who are geniuses, whether it is the ones who are skilled in the arts, whether it is the ones who are skilled in the artificial intelligence or the robotics or the science areas. We have not been preparing our citizens to not just pass the test, but to start to create for Barbados. And when I made the point earlier that we had young people who created an app for the Give Back program, it was with great pride, because for the first time we are seeing young people actually taking the knowledge that they've learned in science and IT and wanting to apply it to transform Barbadian society as we know it. And I think that is the type of educational system that we have to now focus on, not making persons just focus on coming out of school and being hired by someone and looking for a job, but understanding that the jobs that are now being created, in many cases, the lawyers and the doctors are earning less than the people who are involved in the robotics and the artificial intelligence and the creative sector. And therefore, in the new transformation for education, the shift has to be made now rather than later, because we have already lost so many. And therefore, as I said, I am not afraid of what lies ahead. There will always be opposition, but I always maintain that slavery was no doubt, the abolition of slavery was no doubt a difficult decision for the planters back then to make too. But they had to make it, because they recognized the direction in which the country was going if they continued on that trajectory. So there will always be difficult decisions. I think we are too educated a population to not look at all of the models across the world. You can look to Finland, you can look to Canada, you can look to even in Bermuda, you can look at different models, and you don't have to take everything, but you have to take the things that are going to be relevant to Barbados. As a student, I studied in Barbados, I studied overseas. But the one thing at the forefront for me was always, how do I take all of the things that I've learned internationally to be able to help my country? And not that I take everything for granted that I had been taught in the UK, but how do I implement that in my own way, in my own country, to improve what it is in terms of our foundation and what I had learned. And I believe that when I interact with young people across the world who are from Barbados, who have gotten scholarships and exhibitions, and they're in other territories, they want to find a way to give back to Barbados. They don't necessarily want to be outside of Barbados. They love home. And they want to be able to find an environment in Barbados where we are creative, we are innovators, we are doing things that will allow them to come home and to settle. So what better way than to start to transition our thinking from being one where we just sit at the exam than one where we create people who are thinkers and innovators and explorers and discoverers. So I hope I have answered your question, Honourable Member.
Well, I'm willing to admit that I was a lot happier with the answer to the first question, which is not to criticize the answer to the second question necessarily, but to say that in following up, that I think the country is owed a statement as to whether our children, our beloved children, will be doing the 11+ exam for the last time this year. So I'm sure that you will seize on some other occasion to speak to the country on that, on an answer to that question. But I did begin by welcoming you and all of you to the constituency of Christchurch South and to welcome this Parliament and this gathering. And in keeping with the theme of the 11+, I want to say to you, Minister, and your team that you have some next door neighbors here, some young children at St. Lawrence Primary who will be doing the 11+ shortly. They endured the most adverse circumstances over the last 3 years with an overflowing swamp, and they had to move. And in the aftermath of their relocation back into the school, they heard of several schools across this country that were remediated in terms of paint jobs and windows and so on. I want to say to you, Minister, and your team at the Ministry of Education, that those young children who are about to do the 11+ are continuing to make preparation in the most adverse circumstances. They were not treated to a paint job or any other form of remediation over the last summer. And I am here in this constituency before this microphone to ask you and to ask the members of your ministry to pay some attention to the rehabilitation and the remediation of the St. Lawrence Primary School, where those children will be doing the 11+ in a few weeks. I thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Member. I just want to add that we will be willing to match whatever you are prepared to put in as well.
Thank you very much. I had 3 questions or 4? Okay.
Can you hear me? Okay. In the spirit of fairness, I would like to get back to the answer to the Honourable Leader of the Opposition. Sir, if you can pose the question that you had asked before for our memory, quickly.
I think the ministry team well recalls the questions that were asked. So I'll give way to them.
Right. Okay, just to clarify, on the page next to the strategic goals, you were asking, and this is basic education development, the summary, why has it increased from, and this is under approved estimates 2019 to 20, 149,614,702, to revise estimates to 2020 to 161,161,925. The difference being approximately 12 million. Supplementary would have been given for 2 sub-programs, 0277, primary domestic, $5 million, and that $5 million would have been for water tanks, shutters, and generators. And under sub-program 0280, $7 million for the Skills for the Future program. That total is the difference, $12 million. You also asked about 0281, the assisted schools. And if you look in the explanatory notes, under secondary, program 272-0281, you would see assisted private schools provide financial assistance to Industry High School, Metropolitan High, 7 Days Adventist, Unique High, Ursuline Convent School, St. Winifred's, as well as bursaries to students.
Comment?
Madam Chair, thank you. Are there any private schools which are not the beneficiaries of this form of assistance from government?
Yes, sir. Providence, I can think off the top of my head, Providence, Codrington High School, those are two that I know they're not on the program.
Could we therefore inquire as to what the criteria are that qualify these schools for assistance?
Initially, the legislation would have made provision for assistance for private schools, and some of these schools would have come on since that legislation would have been approved.
Is that all, honorable member?
Sorry?
Is that all for now?
No, I haven't asked any question yet in this.
You asked a couple,
I
but
was
go ahead.
just clarifying the answer given to the question prior to lunch. Well, I'll be guided by you, Madam Chair.
You technically have one question in this set to ask.
One more?
Yeah.
I'll ask one for my friend, my honorable friend from St. Lucie. I noticed in the numbers that the Darrell Jordan School is benefiting, I think it's on the education sector enhancement program or something, $65,000, whereas several of the other schools benefit to sums totaling over 100,000, 200, 300, 400,000. But Darrell Jordan, St. Lucie is at 65, and Common Mare, but I'm not bothered about Common Mare, is at 50. I will leave you all member of St. Andrew to query that, but Common Mare is scheduled for only 53. The question is, I'm just querying an explanation as to what accounts for the differentiation in terms of the sums of money under that program. In several instances, over 100, 200, 300, 400,000 but Darrell Jordan is at 65 and Common Mare is at 53. Is it that these schools are well endowed? They raise their own funds. They don't need capital work. So.
Member, I'm pretty sure that you should be aware that the current structure in terms of the Board of Management that exists, they would prepare a program budget document for submission to the ministry indicating the needs of the institution. One of the things that we took particular pains this year to do was to meet with several of the schools, both with the chairman, the principals, and the secretary treasurers to look at what type of expenditure was highly desirable and which type of expenditure was absolutely critical in most cases, and which could pretty much be put on hold if we did not acquire the particular financing that was being requested. There are differences in the schools, but I assure you that it is not on the basis of any favoritism. It is basically on the needs. In some cases, as I told you before, we did an audit of the secondary schools, and there are some that require more significant infrastructural changes than others. There are some where, when we looked at the curriculum, there were significant achievements in particular areas, or the potential to develop particular areas at those schools as we move towards the type of specialist institutions I would have spoken about before. So as a consequence, many of the figures that are reflected for the various schools actually speaks to more an intense look at what the schools are doing and the type of infrastructure and the type of programming that we have agreed as an institution, as an entity in education, as to what is needed for the particular school. So you reference Darrell Jordan, and Darrell Jordan would be receiving funds specifically for retrofitting of their science laboratory, also for the purchase of a photocopier, and for the cost of the audit and the engineer fees, because before we can do any work on the school, obviously we have to identify what the issues are structurally. So this would have been one, I believe, that would have been included in terms of requiring the engagement of persons to deal with the issues of Spalding and those kind of things at the institution. So before we can do that, we will need to engage consultants to address it. In relation to Comamere, the specifics relate to the cost of an AC unit and the provision of the purchase of agricultural and security equipment for the plant. What I, however, thought you would have pointed out, though, was that if you take the Parkinson Secondary School, I thought you would have gone there, because there 751 captures repair work on Block B and the school hall. And permit me to just speak to you a bit on that, because the private sector has responded to the call that I have made repeatedly to get them involved in helping us as a government to accomplish a lot of the works that are needed, the capital works that are needed on a number of the school plants. And the entity, Goddard's Enterprises, has offered to contribute towards the retrofitting of that particular building. For the benefit of those who may have heard about a condemned building, which is on the highway across from CBC, that faces practically CBC. That is the area that we are talking about, which I came to office and discovered that it was condemned. But I came then to understand further that it was really an issue of when they were doing the road works and building the overhead walkway, that a lot of the pollution was coming back from the cars, backing up on the highway and creating problems in the environment at the school. And as a consequence, the building, which housed 16 classrooms, was deemed to be condemned. Fortunately, we've had the premises inspected. If there's such a word as uncondemned, the building has been uncondemned. And the discussions with the corporate entity have allowed us to start to retrofit that particular building over, I believe, a 5 or 6 week period during the summer, for which the government of Barbados will partner with them on this particular project. It is being utilized on this occasion as a flagship relationship with the corporate sector, where they see themselves, particularly because they're in the surrounding community, as having a good works project. And it is intended that other entities in other communities will follow suit to be able to assist us in being able to renovate a number of our school plants and to provide the necessary infrastructure. So I just thought that he would perhaps, the honourable member would perhaps have picked up on things like that. I can say to you as well in relation to St. George, many people would have seen the transformation at St. George Secondary over the past year. There have been several repairs done to the plant, both at the external and internal plant. And for instance, the request for this year is for repairs to be done and refurbishment of the home economics and art laboratories, as well as for the purchase of equipment for agricultural and science departments. That particular institution has tremendous potential in the area of agriculture. It was one of the first schools that I toured as minister, and I recall us receiving some eggs from the chickens that they have, the farm that they have there. And it is, for a lot of students, an opportunity for those who really enjoy being around animals as well to basically get familiar with the area of agriculture. So if you go through bit by bit, we've taken the opportunity to provide things like musical equipment to upgrade at St. Leonard's School. We're doing some repair work to the plant at St. Leonard's. At St. Michael, many of you may be aware that there's a guard wall, which is the exit wall to the plant that has been leaning. It's a very old wall, and we've put some provision of funds in for this year to be able to accommodate that as well. At the Lodge School, which we all know would have undergone some significant repairs in recent times, they have requested the purchase of equipment for their new smart room. Nothing major, but basically to deal with the air conditioning units for the hall and the new smart room as well. And the honorable member is free to ask on any of the other areas, but generally we have tried to do an assessment for this year based on improvements to CVQ programs, to existing plant, and really being able to address the technology areas as well as the science areas and the arts as well in our approach to financing.
Honorable member for St. Michael South Central.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The member for St. Michael South is my neighbor in two places. We share a border in Britons Hill where the people have asked that we jointly be stewards of the Britons Hill area, but we are also neighbors here. I wouldn't say that he was peeping, but he did raise some of the matters that I wanted to address. In particular, the issue of the physical plants and the maintenance of schools. The minister has both fiscal and non-fiscal measures at the ministry's disposal with respect to this matter. And she has very thoroughly addressed several of the fiscal ones, the summer maintenance program and the general maintenance of schools. But there's some other fiscal areas that the estimates make reference to that also have to do with the way that schools are maintained. And one of them has to do with the beautification, the murals, some of the softer landscaping, and so on, that I believe monies and programs are also identified to address. So I wanted to ask about the plans for these kinds of programs, because we know that it's not just about the tables and chairs and the walls, but also how children are able to interact with and maintain their natural environment. There are also some monies allocated to deal with disaster preparedness, to ready schools, not just to serve as shelters, but also to make sure that the schools have a certain level of resilience in their general operation as school plants. So to speak to some of the programs and the monies allocated outside of the summer program, outside of the general maintenance. So that's my first question. Related to that, on the non-fiscal, when I say non-fiscal, I'm referring to things that you don't necessarily have to spend money on, but you can make improvements in. And my question is, when it comes to the mechanism for inspections and reporting of issues with schools, I know the minister said that they're going to carry out some assessments over the next interim period, but surely there is a regular system of inspections, deploying individuals to be able to inspect the schools, but also having a system for reports to be made and responded to in a timely way. Through you, Chair Minister, you said that what you realized that there had been a system of waiting until something happened. And you made this in reference to another matter. But I believe that if I, as the Member of Parliament for St. Michael South Central, could get so many reports, for example, about St. Paul's School, parents, teachers, custodians who would report issues with not only that school, but any other schools, and I'm sure other members have that experience, are able to tell you in very minute detail what are some of the maintenance issues. Surely there's a system of regular reporting that we can make sure that we maintain and that there's a system for. So first, to deal with the beautification and the other kind of softer landscaping and other measures. Second, the non-fiscal issues that you can also use to address some of these things like the inspections and the systems. But third, this is, I'm listing all three as they relate to the same point, and then I'll come back with one more. Related to the maintenance of schools, I seem to recall that the ministry maintains an offer of services register. And that, I believe, is one of the things at our disposal to be able to advance the economic enfranchisement of communities where these schools are located, so that if there are maintenance works to be done, that these opportunities are afforded to people in the area, contractors in the area who become registered with your system, who can bid for some of these contracts and some of these services. And I say that because I'm mindful that this government came to service with the intention of using the government goods and services as one of the areas where we can help to enfranchise the communities. And I'm speaking specifically of the immediate communities in the areas where the schools are located, because similarly, there are people who come to me who live in the area who will pass the school and say, well, what are you all doing with this school or that school? It don't look good or it is. And there are people who are willing to either bid or to volunteer to be able to have some input in making sure that the schools are in proper working condition. So I'll stop there for now and then come back after respond.
Good afternoon. My name is Francisco Miller, Director Acting Education Technical Management Unit, and I will speak to the schools, murals, and beautification project. Essentially, the unit coordinated the painting initiatives in which 6 schools were selected for painting. These schools were the Maria Holder Nursery, Sharon Primary, St. Mary's Primary, Westbury Primary, Grantley Adams Secondary, and Frederick Smith, and the Ann Hill School. 4 schools were identified for murals. These were St. Mary's Primary, the Ann Hill, Grantley Adams, and Frederick Smith. Okay, we would have partnered with Harris Paints, and they would have provided the materials for which we would have used to beautify those schools. We also have the schools beautification initiative, in which we were to maintain the green spaces at select schools. We would have worked closely with the NCC to facilitate the beautification of the general surroundings of the public nursery and primary schools. The 9 schools that were targeted were the Costa Edwards Primary, Bailey's Primary, Eagle Hall, Ellerton Primary, Luther Thorne Primary, Sealer Primary, St. Ambrose Primary, St. George, and St. Joseph. Under that initiative, we would have taken care of the general physical surroundings. We would have also done the actual start. We would have started that with the 3 schools, Ann Hill, Wilkie Cumberbatch, and the Irvin Wilson School, in which we would have cleaned up the area. We would have debushed. We would have had an issue with cow-witch in that area, and we would have started that. The object of that was to actually start that and then beautify the area, doing trees and stuff like that, and involving the community at large. We would have also had, the Prime Minister would have given us some funds for the actual beautification of 3 secondary schools. Those schools would have been the Frederick Smith, the Graydon Seeley, and the Grantley Adams Memorial School. To date, we would have brought on a consultant to provide some drawings because there's the issue of spalling at most of the plants. So it wasn't a case in which we would just change out the windows. We would have had to fix the spalling and stuff. So it would have started as a rather simple project, but given the structural issues at those schools, we would have had to expand the scope of works. So essentially, the drawings and stuff are at an advanced stage, and we are almost ready to pursue the actual renovations at those schools. So that is the status now. Okay. In terms of the general inspections at the primary schools, we have 3 building maintenance supervisors and 2 clerk of works in which there are zones. Currently, they look after the 82 primary and nursery schools. At the currently, there are not enough to really do the kind of work that we would like to do. So essentially, we have prepared a paper to send to cabinet in which we are looking to expand. Actually, we were mandated to actually transition to a state-owned enterprise, and in doing that, we can actually address the real issues, because right now we are hampered by the financial limitations of 12 months. So we have to get things done within 12 months, and sometimes when we go into these schools, we are facing issues which would require a longer time frame. So we are looking to actually move to a board where when we get the funds, we can plan long-term, medium, and short-term. So in other words, we can hold the funds longer and do what we really need to do, and really have a real impactful measure on the problems that we have right now. So we are hoping to have that day up and going by the 1st of April, and you should see some changes, some real changes across the school plan going forward.
Thank you. I didn't hear about the procurement matter in terms of the offer of services register and being able to have open invitations to artisans, new artisans.
Currently, we are compiling that register, and we should have that up and going before the start of the new financial year. That process is ongoing. We are planning to actually offer that, advertise those offer of services. So as soon as we get that put together, we're gonna advertise that.
Thank you. And my final question has to do with something else that was raised earlier by the member for St. Michael West, leader of the opposition. It has to do with the linkages between the school meals department and the agriculture sector specifically. I know that the head of the department spoke earlier to the idea of reducing imported items and depending more on products and vegetables and so on from BADMC. But I suppose my question is a bit more specific. The fact is that when it comes to issues of food security and also being able to expand the agriculture sector so that it has a greater contribution to growth, the school meals department, we usually look to the tourism sector, but the truth is that there are other opportunities. And I'm wondering if there is a more specific policy and program in partnership with the Ministry of Agriculture to look at what they are projecting in terms of increased yields for certain products, and to make sure that there is that there's scope to bring in and to take a lot of what those farmers will be producing, because I might sound a little bit like I speak for the Ministry of Agriculture, but I'm speaking in terms of making sure that the productive sectors that are part of the economy have the space to grow. And so my perspective is a little bit more general and more macro. But I think that it has to be more than just trying to see where we can increase but to have a very targeted program in partnership with the Ministry of Agriculture and Food Security, so that as the Farmers on the Feed program and others of their initiatives are producing, that they have a market. And I think the School Meals Department is one of the clear markets. So can you say anything about whether that's something that's in the works or is envisioned?
That is something that there has been discussion on. That is something that the department intends to do, because it would be beneficial to us to know exactly what the Ministry of Agriculture, what they can provide us with, and so that would we be able to have a consistent supply of certain things, because that is one of the problems that we have now, consistency in our supply. However, we haven't had any formal discussions as yet, but it is something that we're looking into doing.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I extended best wishes to you earlier today, even before the forum is setting. So my position still stands on that. But let me preface my discussion on positing a caveat very early. I am always suspicious of reform. People are reformists. Reformists hide behind gradualism. And many times, reformists become victims of gradualism. What I'm gathering from all the discourse is that there's an urgency as a consequence of the social environment in which we live. People are talking about contemporary events that are occurring in relation to deviance. People are asking about fundamental changes in the educational system. When does the level plus is going to occur, the execution of it or the abolition of it? To me, that is these things are revolutionary and urgent. And I don't want us to couch the language or have a mindset that you are a reformist and that you will take from now to eternity in order to execute. Because the problem here is executed. I would like to know that the execution occur within the next 3 years of this government. Now we're going to use this example. Prior to 2008, this government, and government is a continuum, and we always go back to the history of the changes in education as far back as the 19th century, 1883. The reality is a continuum. Now, before 2008, the government set about on an expansionist program in pre-primary education. I want an answer. Where are we? I'm going to show you how reform and gradualism keeps failing. Where are we in terms of how many children below the age of 5 have been given access to pre-primary education? How many poor people children are still on the outside asking for an opportunity to be able to go into school at 3 years old, having to compete with other boys and girls from wealthy homes who are going to sit the same 11 plus exams with two years more in formal education than those who are functioning with that disadvantage. What percentage of our children from the working class homes are now having access to pre-primary school education at the age of 3? That is my first question, and I'll try to see if we can find a second.
Thank you, sir. Currently, we have 1,047 students in our 12 nursery schools. We're currently working with the Maria Holder Memorial Trust, and we have the Government Hill. We've started to do work at the Government Hill Nursery School, so that would be an expansion of the current Government Hill that's there. And then we have other plans coming on stream, Sears Court and Deacons. So we're working, and we're also looking at Holders Hill. So we are looking to expand the number of nursery schools available, and therefore that would obviously increase the number of students that would have access, those in that nursery age between 3. So technically, we have doubled the amount of students who can have, of nursery schools therefore increase the number of students who can have that access.
Yeah, but that's a good narrative. I just want a straightforward quantitative measurement of where we are in terms of percentage. I can hear 80 schools, but I don't know if 80 schools got in 2 students each, 1 student at 1 school. I would like to know, and we should have a picture, a holistic picture of how successful we have been in terms of achieving the target of full universal pre-primary education, especially if we are talking about equity and equality in the educational system. You don't talk poetry that don't have meaning. So I just want to have meaning to it. And I put it in the context that we have carried about a program that's over a decade or so, and up to now, we have not achieved. I wonder, have we achieved 50% of the efforts? And if the problem lies in the execution, because the policy sounds good, the program sounds good, but have we achieved the numerical objective that we set about to achieve in wiping out the disadvantage prior to the age of 5?
Thank you, Minister. I would jump in here because I think I know where you are going, but I must give you some history to this project, because this project started back in 2013. This is 7 years later, and the construction of the 6 schools that had been agreed have not all been completed. I know that the Maria Holder Trust had become quite impatient with the management of this project under the last administration. I know that the various ministries that had to weigh in to be able to accelerate permissions in terms of the lease arrangements on our coming to office, we all came together and tried to process these applications rather quickly and to help to put certain things in place so that we could achieve exactly what you are speaking of. Because we recognize that while it may not have started with us, there was merit in being able to provide a catchment for the same people's children that you are speaking about. And therefore, we saw it with a certain degree of urgency, and as the Deputy Chief has indicated to you, Government Hill is on track presently. We had some setbacks the other day in relation to some issues there, but we have been able to resolve that, and I believe they're about a month behind or so. But we have been able to resolve it, and in relation to the other projects, we are working with them so that we can finalize all of the necessary arrangements to be able to build out. The truth be told, the Maria Holder Trust has made a significant commitment and contribution to Barbados, and in particular to this sector. And we felt it was important to put the necessary systems in place to accelerate not just the lease of the lands, but also all of the maintenance arrangements that are necessary for these projects to work. So I suspect that once there is now movement on these additional schools, the other 3 schools, and in particular, I believe the drawings for the other 2 are completed, and it is just a case of finalizing the details. But I suspect that within the next year to 2, we should be in a position to have the full complement of what was initially envisaged in terms of being able to get early access to nursery schools for a wider cross-section of the population, and in particular, your residents and their children in St. Michael East.
Thank you. Then my second question, I think that by indicating to us that there's a necessity to abolish the 11 plus, which I absolutely support, but the history that precedes the decision for 11 plus is strongly impregnated with problems existing before the 11 plus. The only reason you want to abolish the system is because something is wrong with the system. So you're saying to me that you have already recognized that there are great defects in the system, and then you are assessed at age 11, and many people then are at a disadvantage because of the defects that precede the time. So you want to move them. I'm only making an assumption in order that I can forward a point. My view is that I've heard about three persons advanced an argument for having some people speak to them as counselors, some people talk about them as child psychologists. But what is really required is not the training courses that are going on at Erdeston, because if the training courses that are going on at Erdeston are not applied into the system, well then the end results, you cannot predict or look forward to any kind of end results, because the teachers never had an opportunity to really apply knowledge about child psychology during the few years in primary schools. And therefore, each teacher should know that there's a philosophy that must be applied if we are to instill the correct ethical principles in the children, and also to give them a sense of consciousness of self from very early. I see how black children nod their heads in shame when they come in contact with other types of people. I also know when they come in contact with their own type, they are very courageous and can be very aggressive without retreating. But when they see certain types of people in front of them, they cannot even talk. You don't even know what language they know. I personally believe that there's serious brain damage at the level of the primary schools in this country. Too many children that I see in neighborhoods that can come up to you and shout out, "Madam Prescott," or call me by an alias title without any fear. But if they see people that are fairer than them, or people that dress in a bow tie, standing in front of them, they hold out their head in shame. And you can hardly hear what they're saying. That has to be some form of psychological damage. And I would believe that a training course at the level of the Erdeston training school, or any tertiary educational institution that those teachers go into, should clearly identify these psychological defects and try to address them early. I believe that all of us see it, but it's so much the norm in the environment that you don't recognize that it is a problem. I feel that, as other members said around here, there's a necessity for just more than a passing moment in the primary school system for psychologists to go in and in some cases sit outside the building. I can tell you about an experience where a psychologist sit on a step, a counselor on a step at Belmont School. She does not even have anywhere to go. And you also put a small room in a partition, a toilet facility, and offer the young lady to sit there. It shows, it is a mirror of the interpretation of the importance of the discipline, if not the person. So I believe that these are issues. I don't want to put forward a straightforward question. Somebody who could package it or even turn it into some form of a synopsis could do so. But that is something that I feel that a comment is worthy, equally as worthy as a question, and probably much better than an omission.
That way.
The honorable member has raised a number of issues, but I just want to point out to him that there is no approach by this ministry or no intention by this ministry to lighten the role of persons who are professionals in terms of intervention. I think the situation at Belmont of which you speak, if I recall correctly, the officer was actually in the corridor at one point. I think when we did because that was the school where we had 4 bathrooms in one space, the toilets were in one space without any division, and we had sought to really rectify the situation before the start of the last school term, last school year. with a view to creating temporary structures and then being able to create a more permanent structure. So I gathered that the space that the individual is now occupying is a building or a space next door, which I think there was consultation with her as well in terms of being able to have another location. Now, I think the member would agree that the school plant is quite constrained. And truth be told, the fact that there is actually a resource person in the school should be a focus as well, because there are a lot of other of the schools that may not have that type of intervention. So I think a recognition had to have been made by the ministry that that type of support personnel was actually required. Now, it is unfortunate that we don't have in all of the schools a designated location for counselors and safety officers. We don't have it. Okay, and those are things that in the new model and with the right resources as the economy improves, we want to move in that direction. Because I've taken the view in this ministry that the professionals, especially in the Student Support Services Department, are as critical to this ministry as the Education Technical Management Unit. Because if the plant is falling down or the children are not properly assessed, we got a problem. So I want to give you the assurance, remember, that it is not, I don't take it lightly in terms of the interventions by these professionals, and that where we can accommodate in better circumstances, we will certainly seek to do so. But I think you well know the nature of the plant. We did a lot of work, including, I believe, the new driveway that you got at Belmont when I went up there as well. And we could do more, but we did quite a bit in terms of addressing a number of the major issues that had presented us at the time. And the bathrooms was perhaps the most compelling issue at the time that needed to be addressed with the resources that were available to us. So I hope I've answered your not-so question.
Minister, I have no doubt about your compassion. I have no doubt about your acumen and your commitment to the effort. I also am fully aware that you do not know everything in every school. You don't know how many nails the contractor put in the roof, and I would not expect you to be au fait with that. But I just felt that I don't want the ministry to be victims of the diminishing of memory. And I want them to know that St. Michael's East, that there's a representative of my type in St. Michael's East who keep a very close eye on issues across the constituency. And I want them to pay some attention to security at Belmont. I want them to pay some attention to what is happening to the counseling at Belmont School, and continue to make a meaningful contribution to the school. From all the records which I have seen over the number of years, the school was performing at a very low level. Sometimes if you see how the community respond with great enthusiasm to a child or two passing for Harrison College, and you know, Harrison College is perceived as the apex, and the Harrison College boys and Cobbermere boys as well, now perpetuating elements of discrimination across Barbados. So we now have institutional discrimination, not class discrimination, not race discrimination, but sometimes boys that went to Parkinson and boys that went to no school at all like me, sometimes you feel a little embarrassed because you figure you never went to Harrison College or Cobbermere. But Cobbermere are really mocking. They're only mocking things because they don't know the history of the other schools, or that they would not try to rise to the same status and to be bashed in glory because they're in these institutions. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Never fell asleep in this corner, man. Thank you, Madam Chair. My question to the Minister relates to Deacon's Development Center. Could you share with the public what plans the Ministry of Education has for that facility?
You would call that a leading question, member. That facility, I think we had the opportunity with you to be able to tour the facility earlier last year. We have been able to provide some funds in the estimate to be able to start some renovations at that facility because we want to acquire the premises for the Barbados Vocational Training Board to be able to utilize as a skills training facility. It has been dormant for some time, and we were able to reach an arrangement with Ministry of Housing as well as, I believe, Urban Development as well for the use of that facility. It would allow for us to start to develop out the international cuisine program at the Barbados Vocational Training Board and to expand the programs in that area, which for us is a very significant catchment in the Deacons area. But it would allow for persons certainly who are wishing to pursue level 3, which is obviously the level after 1 and 2, to be able to continue to obtain their certification. The intention also is that there will be some daytime courses as well as some evening courses that will be offered there as well. So the funds that have been budgeted will basically allow for us to be able to build out that facility in short order in order to start the renovations that are necessary to get that back on track for the next school term.
Thank you.
Honorable Member for St. George South.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Let me begin by recognizing that on Friday the 21st of February was 7 years that the good lady, Minister of Education, entered the walls of Parliament. And I want to congratulate her and the other colleagues who entered on that day with her, including myself, on the work that she has done, both in opposition and the work that she continues to do as Minister of Education. And I received a greeting from someone dear to me, Minister, who said, "Tell my good dear friend that Ellerton Primary staff and students are very happy. Thank you for repairing the fence. It may seem as a small achievement, but the way the world is going today, when persons can step into a school with the level of crime that we are seeing and deviant behavior that we are seeing, we, the residents of Ellerton and the surrounding districts, offer special thank you. And as I go further, on behalf of the member for St. George North, the St. Jude's Primary School, we are here, Madam Chair, and I welcome you back. We have had a lot of discussions. That physical plant at St. Jude's School, Madam Chief Educational Officer, that I have a lot of respect for and a lot of time for, I think we need to look at it seriously. It is a plant that is posing some environmental challenges not only to the staff but to the students. And I wouldn't go any further because when I mentioned that and I said welcome back to the chair, you understand what I'm speaking about. Please have some urgent attention paid to the physical plant at St. Jude's Primary School. And while it is in St. George North, I have a cadre of constituents who attend that school as well. And generally, the staff, they are complaining about the physical plant. It is not a plant that I would want my child to go to. And if I say that in these walls here, then you understand how I feel about that plant. But my question though, Madam Chair, I don't know if the minister will answer, but it speaks to not tertiary education, but non-academic training. In our manifesto, I think it's on page 22, we speak to placing greater focus on the expansion of technical and vocational education and training. And for years, we've been hearing about the limitations and the limited capacity that we have within the vocational training facility in Barbados. And there are several frontiers that we have to push, new developments. A number of students coming out of secondary school, all don't want to be doctors or engineers or lawyers, all don't want to be politicians. But they have technical skills, they're good with their hand. But I'm afraid that the physical plant that we have, and the need to compete with South America. We have a plant at Sears Court. We have so many children who want to enter the facility, the vocational training facility. They have excellent skills with their hand, but no place to go. I am not blaming you, Minister. I'm not blaming probably anyone, the educational officer. But we need to tell the country what are our plans for the Vocational Training Board, building capacity, building capability, pushing new frontiers. We're at a delicate stage in the history of education in this country, and we have to open up new frontiers for our young people who are skillful. And I'm seeing many of them come into the trust loans for loans, but some of them are not trained. And I have to speak to TVET head, Mr. Henderson Eastman. I have a lot of respect for him as well. We'll have a private meeting in my ministry to look at building up cooperatives within the builders and artisans that we just formed, a cooperative of builders and artisans. So that's my question, though, to Mr. Thompson and to the minister. What are we doing in terms of building up capacity and capabilities within the vocational training institution in this country?
Good evening. Henderson Thompson, Director, Barbados Vocational Training Board. And sir, thank you. I welcome the question. We have some great plans for vocational education in this country. And like you said, capacity is our greatest challenge. And permit me to say this. We have some very popular programs at the board, where lots of young people apply to come to these programs. Madam Minister, let me explain. We have a program called International Cuisine. It's being offered at All Saints in St. Peter. I'll sign it for you shortly, sir. And we have over 300 people applying for that program every single year since we started it. We can only accommodate 16 persons per year. That is what I'm talking about, capacity. We talk about Bobcat operations, which is the skid steer loader. We have over 250 people applying per year to get into that program. Now, in fact, per cohort, because it's a one-semester program, we can only take in 16 persons per year. Our problem isn't being able to offer the program. We have the capable people to do it, but we don't have the physical capacity. And what is happening to us, unless we can get land, and I mean a lot of land. And I will say it in this, I hope I can say it in this form, we want a plantation. But we don't want it at any cost. But we need a plantation, that type of land, about 50 acres plus.
Get in there, Thompson.
That we can really offer programs, and the private sector is willing to help. Is willing to help. The private sector took us and showed us some years ago the bank's property in Wildy. The private sector took us. We didn't ask them. They called us and took us there and said, this will be good for you. They took us to Plan Track in Eagle Hall and said, this will be good for you. They took us, arranged meetings for us to go. And we were unsuccessful in getting those places. But if we have the land, private sector, and some international agencies say they are willing to help us build out, the government doesn't have to do it all on their own. We are not asking for that. We are asking for assistance in getting land so that we can train young people in a number of these high demand areas. in fact, in one location. In fact, we are the only institution in this country who have, you can speak to a principal who can tell you their plant is X place and all of their staff is there. BVTB has an annex because our staff has grown over the years. At the Pine Road, I see my staff at Pine Road once a while. And then we have the centers all around the island. But the thing for us is if we can have one plant like everybody where we can manage effectively, then we can look, and we do, and I'm talking very quickly because I know my time is limited, but we have the curriculum development office department, we have a research department that is working to tell us what new programs we can roll out. So we have the technical capacity to do it. But we can't execute if we have the old plans. And just like some ministries now who have buildings that were old, really old, we inherit some of those buildings. Because from the Ministry of Education years ago, they would say, well, this school is closed, you can have it to do tech vault. So you move the children and the young people out of the school that had outgrown them, and you're asking them when they turn 16, 17, to return back to the same classroom, which was not fit for purpose or built for purpose. So I'm making this plea that as long, and I promise the country, as long as we can get the physical capacity, we have the technical expertise in this country, we have the retired Defense Force people and so on who can help us, who are trained in maritime areas and all other areas, who would be able to, who have the qualifications, who can join us. But we need, like anything else, the budget to do so as well. We are behind because, like Minister alluded to, Minister Sutherland, the Colombians and the Latin Americans know how to do it. They have seen and have moved to the position where they now need to look at vocational training as an agency of social transformation and economic development. We are there. We are there because I'm seeing that we are in a ministry now, which is called the Ministry of Education, Technological, and Vocational Training. We are now a third of a ministry. And we are ready to operate at capacity of a third of that ministry.
Thank you, Minister and Mr. Thompson. I can say without a shadow of doubt, Minister, that you have some very competent officers in your ministry. But I cannot speak for you because I know you are more capable than I am at speaking. But I want to put in a plug for you here, and you put in the plug for yourself. The South District Primary School that is closed, we share borders. You call me your brother, I call you your sister, Minister. And that school, I heard the minister, the member for St. Michael East speak about pre-primary. And I heard a list of schools and a list of plants being rolled out within the next year. But I would want you to put in a plug for us. The South District Primary School is there. It is a physical plant that we can turn into a nursery, a pre-primary school. And we have a wide catchment area that we can fill that pre-primary school even without going out of our boundaries. So I'm just making that plea for the old South District Primary School to be turned into a nursery as you seek to build up pre-primary education in this country. I thank you, Madam Chair.
Honorable member for the city.
Madam.
Question is that I do not report to the Honorable Speaker the progress on the Head 87. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. All honorable members against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
The chairman has reported progress and asks for leave to sit again. Honorman for City of Bridgetown.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the suspension of the sitting until 4:20.
The question that the sitting be suspended until 4:20. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it. This honorable chairman stands suspended until 4:20 p.m.